Looking back, I can still recall that morning at 6:30 when I discovered 47 bright orange violation stickers plastered all over my Navy patrol boat. They had systematically defaced official military equipment, and my hands were shaking as I tried to scrape the thick adhesive off the American flag. It was not my post-traumatic stress disorder acting up. It was absolute volcanic rage. Then she appeared. Beatrice Ashworth Klein, 63 years old, holding an industrial adhesive gun with a smug smile. She told me my military toy was ruining property values, and that military families like mine needed to place soldiers somewhere else. After surviving 3 roadside bombs as a bomb disposal specialist, while my wife Sarah worked the intensive care unit and our 12-year-old twin boys slept inside, this lakefront house was supposed to be our peaceful sanctuary. That woman had absolutely no idea she had just declared war on my family, nor did she comprehend the training I possessed. Looking back, you and I can probably agree that pushing a bomb technician is a dangerous gamble. At the time, I was Chief Petty Officer Danny Sullivan, with 23 years of active duty in the Navy, specializing in explosive ordnance disposal. I had stared death in the face more times than most people change the oil in their cars. Surviving 3 roadside bomb attacks in Afghanistan had left me with post-traumatic stress, but I was the quiet type who kept it to himself. I had purchased that lakefront home using my Veterans Affairs loan to serve as a quiet sanctuary. The sound of the water lapping against the timber dock was exactly what I needed to soothe my frayed nerves. My wife Sarah was working long, exhausting shifts in the intensive care unit at our local hospital back then, while our 12-year-old twin boys, Marcus and Tyler, were captivated by my military stories. The boat itself was far from ordinary. It was a 28-foot Boston whaler, an official shore patrol vessel registered under hull number SP-4429. I was responsible for coordinating weekend harbor security as part of my official active duty assignment at the nearby naval station. That vessel gave me a sense of order, a steady routine that kept my mind grounded during my recovery. Painted in regulation federal gray with official markings, every item on board belonged to the United States government. Then, of course, there was Beatrice, whom everyone in the neighborhood referred to as a typical homeowner association nightmare. Beatrice had inherited a $2.3 million lakefront estate and had spent 8 years ruling as the homeowner association compliance chair. She drove an $85,000 Mercedes with vanity plates that actually read compliance. I am not making this up. She had a grand vision of transforming our waterfront into an elite luxury development. To her, military vessels created an unsavory maritime atmosphere, which was just her way of saying my boat looked too blue-collar for her wealthy buyers. She had spent weeks tracking my movements, knowing I left for patrol at 6 in the morning. At 5:30 that Tuesday, she crept down to my dock wearing a full hazardous materials suit because she apparently believed my patrol boat was filled with volatile explosives. Armed with industrial-grade warning stickers that required a professional heat gun to strip, she systematically covered every square inch she could reach. The hull, the windshield, the radio antennas, and even our American flag were defaced. There were 47 stickers in total, each citing completely fabricated homeowner association violations. When I walked down and found that mess, the metallic taste of raw adrenaline immediately flooded my mouth. My post-traumatic stress always flared when I saw official military property treated with such disrespect. It felt like a direct insult to my service and the sacrifices I had made. But she was not done. She handed me a laminated sheet demanding $4,750 for unauthorized mooring, complete with fake legal citations. Standing there in her designer clothing while I struggled to scrape industrial adhesive off federal property, she confidently declared that our neighborhood had standards, and my military presence was incompatible with their lifestyle. The harsh scent of that chemical adhesive remover mixing with my hot coffee created a nauseating cocktail that, looking back, became the official scent of my war with Beatrice. Because make no mistake, a true war is exactly what this became. My initial reaction was to report her antics to my commanding officer, but I made the decision to handle it like a normal civilian first. That was a major miscalculation. She viewed my patience as weakness and my professional boundary as fear, completely unaware that I had spent 20 years defusing bombs under intense pressure. What Beatrice failed to realize at the time was that defacing official military property is a serious federal offense. And as for me, I had deep connections with the Shore Patrol, people who absolutely do not tolerate civilians messing with naval equipment. But I am getting ahead of myself. First, she had to escalate the conflict, because that was simply her nature. Exactly 3 days after the adhesive incident, she made the decision to go completely nuclear. She filed an official, formal complaint with the Coast Guard, claiming that my patrol boat lacked civilian registration and constituted a major threat to homeland security. If you understand anything about maritime law, you know that doing this is like calling the fire department because a lawn sprinkler is too wet. The following Monday, Lieutenant Rodriguez from the Coast Guard arrived at my dock, clutching a clipboard and looking like he would rather be anywhere else in the world. I met him down at the water, where the morning sun created a mirror reflection on the calm lake. He explained that they had received an official complaint about my vessel, maintaining a professional tone while clearly finding the situation absurd. I immediately handed over all my paperwork, including the Navy registration, Shore Patrol orders, military identification, and insurance forms. He examined every sheet with the absolute slowness of a man who knew he was about to waste an hour of his life on bureaucratic nonsense, before finally admitting that my boat was a fully documented military vessel. Rodriguez openly admitted that he could not comprehend the nature of the complaint. Right on cue, Beatrice appeared, as if she could smell federal drama from a mile away. She had been observing us from her massive estate, using those $400 marine binoculars she had purchased just to spy on my daily routine. Striding down her manicured lawn, she loudly accused me of intimidating federal officers and demanded they investigate my suspicious cargo of explosive materials. The officer looked at me, I looked at him, and we both stared back at her as if she had just told us my boat was a disguised spaceship. Looking back, that was when my explosive ordnance disposal training really saved me. In my line of work, panic gets you killed, so you learn to remain absolutely calm. I calmly offered the lieutenant a complete procedural inspection of the vessel's safety gear, showing him our official flares, regulation life jackets, and emergency radio systems. It was all strictly by the book. Beatrice, however, refused to listen, screaming that I was hiding dangerous materials and questioning why military gear was allowed in a residential harbor. That was the moment Rodriguez finally lost his patience. He firmly told her that the boat was an authorized Navy vessel with valid paperwork, operated by qualified personnel on duty, and that no maritime laws were being violated. But she was already moving to her next play. While the lieutenant stood there on the dock, she dialed her phone and began shouting into the receiver so that we would hear every word. She shrieked into the phone, claiming she needed to report military intimidation of federal officers by a subject with access to explosives. Looking back, that call taught me a valuable lesson about federal protocol. When a civilian files a fraudulent report with a federal agency, particularly involving national security, they are required to open an inquiry. Even when a claim is absurd, they must follow procedure. Naturally, my commanding officer, Captain Hayes, was furious when federal investigators contacted him regarding one of his active Shore Patrol officers. But my research that week yielded a critical piece of information. Under maritime law, homeowner association rules stop completely at the high tide line, meaning federal orders supersede any local regulations. In simple terms, homeowner associations have zero authority over military vessels. But Beatrice was far from finished, and you and I both know how fast these situations can spiral. Later that week, I discovered she had targeted 6 other military families in our community with the exact same complaints, using the same Homeland Security accusations. The turning point arrived when Lieutenant Rodriguez called my personal phone to warn me that they had received matching reports against multiple local service members. Hearing that, I felt my familiar cold mission focus settle over me. This was no longer simple, annoying neighborhood harassment. It had become a systematic, coordinated attack on active duty military personnel. In my line of work, when someone targets military families, you do not just defend, you investigate. I began keeping meticulous professional logs, compiling detailed after-action reports for every single encounter with Beatrice. I recorded precise times, dates, witnesses, and verbatim quotes, assembling the kind of bulletproof documentation that would make any judge advocate general proud. Meanwhile, Beatrice was busy running her own surveillance campaign. Those expensive binoculars were always glued to her face as she mapped my patrol schedule and photographed my dock. The heavy stench of her constant cigarette smoke drifting across the water during her long watch sessions became as regular as the morning fog. Looking back, the neighborhood had actually started joking that they could set their watches by the exact moment Karen began her daily surveillance. She had no idea she was making a fatal miscalculation, misinterpreting my quiet professionalism as a sign of weakness. But as a retired explosive ordnance disposal specialist, my training taught me to treat hostile situations like an unexploded bomb. You do not rush in screaming. You assess the threat, analyze the trigger mechanism, and systematically prepare for a controlled disposal. Within 2 weeks, she launched her next phase. She created a fictional group called the Civilian Harbor Safety Committee, tricking 3 elderly neighbors into signing a petition to ban military vessels, claiming my boat caused fuel spills and noise. I remember studying that petition while sipping my morning coffee on the porch, watching the steam rise into the crisp October air. The scent of damp leaves mixed with the sharp tang of diesel fuel from the docks. It was not just the blatant discrimination that caught my eye, but the clinical, highly polished legal phrasing. It did not look like a grassroots neighborhood effort at all. I immediately began knocking on doors. My first stop was 82-year-old Mrs. Henderson, who was sharp as a tack. When I asked about her signature on the petition, she was utterly bewildered. She insisted she would never sign such garbage, especially since her late husband had spent 30 years in the Navy. Down the street, Mr. Garcia gave me the exact same reaction. Mr. Garcia made it clear he would never support anything targeting military families, pointing out that his own son was currently deployed in the Pacific. That conversation triggered my analytical training. Having spent a career analyzing explosive devices and documenting evidence for federal investigators, I had developed an eye for minute details. When I compared the signatures, I noticed something remarkable. The handwriting on the second and third lines of the petition matched the violation stickers Karen had slapped on my boat. I photographed the forged documents, gathered signed affidavits from my neighbors, and compiled a detailed report for the Homeowner Association Board. Her reaction to this was as hostile as expected. She retaliated by filing a police report, claiming I had threatened her with military-style violence during our brief argument at the docks. Officer Martinez, whom I recognized from local veterans meetings, was dispatched to handle the call. He listened calmly as Karen spun a dramatic tale of being terrorized by aggressive tactics, but then he asked to see her proof of these threats. Her entire case rested on my statement, where I told her she had forged signatures and that I could prove it. Martinez looked at her and remarked that it sounded like a statement of fact, not a threat. He then pulled me aside and told me to keep logging every encounter, warning me that this pattern of harassment was only going to escalate. The following Thursday, my wife Sarah came home from her hospital shift, looking visibly shaken. An anonymous note had been left on her windshield, calling her military trash and telling her to find a husband who did not kill people for a living. The handwriting was identical to Karen's fake stickers. Seeing my kids ask why someone hated my job was the exact moment my patience evaporated. This was direct psychological warfare against my family. During my late-night research, I uncovered a critical piece of leverage. Under the Federal False Statements Act, making fraudulent reports to a federal agency like the Coast Guard is a serious felony carrying a 5-year prison sentence, and Karen had filed several. In other words, you should never make up lies to federal maritime authorities about military-grade equipment. The real turning point came when I set up high-definition, motion-activated security cameras around my dock. The technology was incredible, capturing crystal-clear footage even at 3 in the morning and saving it directly to a secure cloud server. What those cameras caught would have been hilarious if it was not so incredibly invasive. Karen was conducting regular, middle-of-the-night surveillance missions, lurking around the slips with a high-end camera. She was compiling a creepy dossier, photographing my visitors, my children playing by the water, and even my wife relaxing in her chair. The true extent of her obsession became clear when I analyzed her surveillance schedule. She had somehow managed to get her hands on my official Shore Patrol duty roster, which is restricted military information, allowing her to time her harassment campaigns for when I was away from home. This meant she had an active informant feeding her intelligence from inside the installation. When I reached out to other military families nearby, I realized we were all facing the same threat. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, Petty Officer Thompson, and Sergeant Davis had all faced identical forged complaints, fake stickers, and targeted harassment. She was waging a coordinated war against every service member in the neighborhood. A heavy layer of tension hung over our household during those weeks, turning our peaceful lakeside home into a stressful watch post. Every time I departed for active patrol duty, I felt a knot in my stomach, wondering what I would find when I got back. Sarah and I constantly worried about what hostile notes might be waiting for her at the hospital. However, studying her behavior taught me a lot about her psychology. She craved dramatic confrontation, and my calm, strictly procedural reactions were driving her mad. Frustrated people eventually slip up, and by November, she finally made her move. I walked down to the docks for morning patrol and found her luxury sedan parked sideways across the launch ramp. She had not just parked nearby. Her car was parked directly across the ramp, completely blocking the federal waterway access I needed for official patrol duties. Karen herself was standing ankle-deep in the muddy lake water, wearing designer high heels and an expensive white pantsuit, screaming about some emergency homeowner association meeting. She claimed they had granted her the power to shut down federal operations. It was a bizarre, comical sight. This meticulously styled woman ruining her expensive clothes while waving around a folder of fake safety forms. She yelled that I could not launch my vessel without her committee's approval. I just stood there, taking a slow, deep breath of the morning mist. My military training took over instantly. If you have ever been in a high-stakes situation, you know that keeping a cool head is the only way to win. I calmly informed her that she was actively blocking official federal patrol orders, but she snapped back that she did not care about the military or my orders. Right then, Petty Officer Bellamy arrived on the scene. I had radioed base security the second I spotted her vehicle blocking the ramp. Bellamy stood by and witnessed her wild claims about having control over federal waterways. He quietly pulled me aside and noted that her actions were a direct federal violation, asking if he should contact our command to initiate a formal response. Karen immediately flew into a rage when she overheard Bellamy's quiet remark, demanding to know if we were threatening her. She claimed she was documenting everything for her lawyer, holding up a video camera to catch me acting like an aggressive bully. The tense standoff only ended when the marina manager arrived and threatened to tow her car for blocking emergency access. Her real retaliation came 2 days later, when I found industrial adhesive had been used to glue heavy condemned signs to my hull. These were not cheap neighborhood stickers. They looked like official government notices from a fictional federal safety board, complete with forged seals and threatening legal jargon. The physical damage to the boat was severe, as the industrial glue had fused with the specialized gel coat finish on the hull. The repair estimate came out to $20,800, representing criminal vandalism of government property. I took high-resolution photos of the fake federal logos and forged seals before trying to clean it. The harsh chemical scent of the adhesive remover mixed with my morning coffee was nauseating, perfectly matching the toxic absurdity of her actions. During my legal research, I uncovered another massive detail. Vandalizing active military equipment bypasses local police entirely, triggering immediate federal jurisdiction and bringing in the FBI. At this point, you and I can see exactly where she made her next mistake. Uncle Sam takes property damage very seriously, but Karen was completely blind to the federal trouble she was bringing down on herself. She actually hired a licensed private investigator from Rodriguez Investigations to dig up dirt on me. For 3 weeks, this investigator followed me around, documenting my standard, fully regulated patrol duties. The ironic twist came when the investigator called me directly. He introduced himself, explained he had been hired by Karen, and told me he was closing the case because all my activities were completely legal. He had already advised his client to drop her meritless campaign. Looking back at how she reacted, it still makes me chuckle. Instead of backing down, she fired me on the spot and immediately hired a replacement. That new hire was her 26-year-old nephew, Trevor, a kid with a messy criminal record and a serious drug habit who was desperate enough to do stakeout work just to cover his rent. Trevor's idea of professional surveillance was sitting in a rusted-out Honda Civic, chain-smoking cheap cigarettes, and squinting through cheap drugstore binoculars to take blurry photos of my boat. But the real comedy was Karen's own security setup. When she snuck out at 3 in the morning to slap those fake condemned notices on my property, she wore full military camouflage, genuinely believing it made her invisible to the world. Rather than keeping her hidden, Those motion-activated cameras captured every single second of her committing multiple federal crimes in crystal clear, high definition. If you and I were to watch that footage today, we'd laugh just as hard as the night security guard did when he first showed it to me. There was Karen, sneaking along the wooden docks in her ridiculous camo gear, holding a tub of industrial adhesive and a stack of counterfeit federal notices. She spent 40 minutes carefully pasting them onto my hull, constantly checking her phone to make sure she was getting her best angles. That was the exact moment my entire strategy changed. Up until then, I had been playing a strictly defensive game, but this blatant escalation crossed a dangerous red line. At that point, I decided it was time to rely on my Navy explosive ordnance disposal training. I needed to analyze the threat, identify the trigger mechanism, and carefully prepare for a controlled, tactical counterstrike. The gloves were finally off. My biggest breakthrough came when I realized Karen somehow possessed my exact military patrol schedule. She did not just have my standard Tuesday and Thursday shifts. She knew about my emergency calls and unlisted training exercises. It became clear that someone on the inside was leaking classified military data to her. Every single act of harassment matched my departures perfectly, occurring within hours of my official duty roster being updated with eerie precision. To catch the leak, I quietly laid a trap by submitting a fabricated schedule change through our official military channels. I reported that I would be out on extended night operations the following Thursday evening. When that night arrived, I parked my truck across the street from the marina and waited in the darkness. Sure enough, at 11:47 p.m., Karen's luxury Mercedes glided into the parking lot. She slipped out and headed toward my slip with a fresh roll of adhesive stickers, completely unaware that I was watching her through high-tech night vision gear. The next morning, I walked straight into the marina office to find out who was leaking my official operational schedules. I told them bluntly that leaking my schedule was a severe operational security breach. Within 5 minutes, Maria Gonzalez, the part-time office clerk, completely fell apart and started crying. She confessed that Karen was paying her $500 a week just to report my exact departures. When she whimpered that she did not think it was a big deal, I explained the harsh reality of the Homeland Security Act. Divulging active military patrol schedules can carry a 10-year federal prison sentence. Her face turned entirely white. Yet, that was only the tip of the iceberg, as my investigation soon revealed Karen was running a deliberate scheme to drive every single military family out of our waterfront community. Looking into the local property registry exposed her actual motives. I discovered that Karen owned 40% of Peton Development LLC, a luxury construction firm drawing up plans for a $50 million waterfront resort. To attract ultra-wealthy buyers, she wanted to scrub the area of what she considered undesirable elements. Hard-working military families with government-issued vessels simply did not fit her high-end vision. Over the past 2 years, she had already forced 5 military families to pack up and move away, using these exact same dirty tactics. She would systematically fabricate HOA complaints and make life absolute hell until they finally gave up. My search also showed that her development project had violated 3 major environmental permits and built a private dock without Navy authorization. Now, you and I might think a neighborhood dispute is just petty bickering, but this was a serious federal matter. Paying an insider for military duty rosters constitutes bribery under federal law, carrying a mandatory 10-year prison sentence. Bribing someone for military intelligence is a felony, even if it is just a routine schedule. I suddenly realized I was no longer dealing with simple boat violations or loud noise complaints. This was a coordinated, illegal housing discrimination racket designed for corporate greed. In short, she was orchestrating an illegal housing discrimination scheme with major federal enhancements. From that moment on, the balance of power shifted entirely in my favor. She assumed she was merely bullying and stubborn sailor who ignored her silly HOA rules. But she had actually committed multiple felonies against an experienced investigator who had now mapped out her entire operation. I quickly reached out to the other affected military families to share my findings. Lieutenant Commander Jackson, Sergeant Davis, and Petty Officer Thompson had all experienced the exact same patterns of harassment and fake violations. Together, we had airtight proof of a criminal conspiracy. We were looking at a systematic campaign targeting military families through bribery, vandalism, and fraud. However, my years in the service taught me that intelligence is useless unless you execute your plan flawlessly. Lashing out would only play into the aggressive soldier stereotype she wanted to paint. Instead, I began designing a methodical counter-operation, using the same step-by-step precision I once used to defuse improvised explosive devices in Afghanistan. Every single detail was logged, and every contingency was mapped out. She had no clue that the quiet sailor she was targeting actually had 23 years of specialized experience in handling controlled explosions. At that point, the countdown to our controlled tactical detonation had officially begun. I transformed my garage into a specialized operations center that would have made my old explosive ordnance disposal unit proud. I set up military-issued laptops running federal law databases, pinned up dated surveillance photos, and mapped out the exact blind spots of the marina security cameras. But the crown jewel of the room was my custom-built pressure-sensitive paint system. The design was incredibly elegant, using highly persistent, non-toxic military marking dye wired directly to pressure plates I had salvaged years ago from decommissioned training equipment. If an unauthorized intruder stepped onto my deck, they would instantly trigger a pressurized spray of bright green dye designed to saturate them from head to toe and stay active for 3 weeks. As I carefully wired the triggers, my hands moved with the effortless muscle memory built over decades of handling sensitive fuses. The distinct scent of marine-grade sealant mixed with cold metallic military hardware, bringing back a flood of memories from my active duty days. When Sarah leaned against the garage door frame and asked if I was building a booby trap, I calmly explained that it was merely a non-lethal, visible trespasser identification system. In truth, the entire setup was completely legal under strict federal property protection laws. I had spent hours doing thorough legal research and even consulted Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, a base JAG attorney, about our rights to protect active duty gear. As you and I both know, having the law on your side is everything, and he confirmed that marking systems and remote surveillance are fully authorized security measures. But the pressurized paint trap was only my first phase. I also installed high-definition, motion-activated infrared cameras linked to a secure cloud backup, ensuring that any future nighttime vandalism would be documented as pristine federal evidence. Using standard military-grade training compound is completely legal, leaves no permanent damage, and provides undeniable evidence that holds up in any federal courtroom. To put it simply, our tactical gear is far superior to anything you can buy at a local hardware store. While building these physical defenses, I was also quietly organizing our community. We formed the Veterans Harbor Watch, a group of 12 military families who had been logging Karen's harassment. They provided years of detailed records, while Lieutenant Commander Jackson contributed a financial spreadsheet showing her development firm owed $340,000 in unpaid environmental fines. Looking back on that time, the pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. Sergeant Davis had managed to secure rock-solid evidence of Karen attempting to bribe city council members for zoning variances, while Petty Officer Thompson came through with documentation of her saying military families lowered property values. I used my connections to coordinate with base security, scheduling increased routine patrols past her house during her peak harassment hours. We even had shore patrol boats strategically positioned to move in minutes the second my paint trap went off. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. My logs showed Karen always did her worst vandalism under the pitch-black cover of a new moon. The next one was scheduled for November 23rd, which gave me the perfect window to spring my trap. My most valuable ally in this whole operation ended up being Lisa Bellamy, an investigative reporter from our regional news station. Lisa was a specialist in military family issues, and she had already been tracking discrimination patterns in these wealthy waterfront communities. We struck a deal where she would expose Karen's systematic targeting of military families in exchange for exclusive first-hand access to the story when it finally broke. Getting the federal agencies on board took a bit longer, but it was worth every single second. Federal Bureau of Investigation Special Agent Rodriguez opened up a preliminary case against Karen for filing false federal reports and bribing people for military information. I had secondary traps ready for the dock, just in case she avoided the boat entirely. If she sent her nephew Trevor instead, my high-definition cameras would capture clear conspiracy evidence. If she escalated to serious property damage, Shore Patrol was standing by to respond immediately. The technical preparation for this operation took me right back to my explosive ordnance disposal days, It was methodical and precise, with redundant backups built into every system. The only real difference was that instead of defusing a bomb, I was preparing to detonate Karen's criminal enterprise. My commanding officer, Captain Hayes, reviewed the plan and remarked that this was either the most elaborate neighborhood dispute he had ever seen, or I was applying military tactics to civilian law enforcement. I told him when civilians use federal crimes to target Navy families, it becomes our concern. Captain Hayes ended up signing off on extra shore patrol resources to beef up our harbor security during the target window. Officially, we logged it as a series of routine training exercises, but unofficially, everyone knew that nobody messed with Navy families on the captain's watch. As November 23rd drew closer, that familiar, ice-cold pre-mission calm settled over me. Every single detail had been mapped out, every contingency was covered, and every piece of equipment was tested and ready. Karen had spent months escalating her petty harassment campaign, completely oblivious to the fact that she was walking into a trap designed by someone who spent 20 years outsmarting bomb makers. The specialized paint was loaded, the cameras were rolling, and the cavalry was waiting. It was go time. Things really started to unravel for Karen when her petition for a restraining order was thrown out, earning her a severe warning from the judge about frivolous filings. Judge Martinez, who happened to be a Navy veteran himself, looked over my evidence folder and found her claims of military stalking and intimidation completely baseless. He looked right at her and warned her that filing false accusations against military personnel serving their community was potentially criminal, ordering her to cease all harassment of the Sullivan family immediately. But instead of backing down like a sensible person, she doubled down on her obsession. Within just a few hours of leaving that courthouse, she was right back at the marina with her nephew Trevor, carrying a briefcase stuffed with cash. Later on, the marina clerk, Maria Gonzalez, testified that Karen had offered her $2,000 to accidentally damage my boat with heavy dock equipment during routine maintenance. Maria was already shaken up after learning about federal security breach charges in the area, so she immediately called Shore Patrol to report the bribery attempt. She told Petty Officer Bellamy that Karen wanted her to make it look like an accident, promising a total of $5,000 if the boat was damaged badly enough to be removed from the marina. At that point, this was no longer simple neighborhood harassment. This was a conspiracy to commit federal crimes. While I kept up my regular patrol duties, my trap sat waiting in absolute readiness, pressure plates calibrated and cameras rolling. Every single morning, I made it a point to check the system during my routine boat inspections, maintaining the exact same professional, calm demeanor that had been driving Karen crazy for months. Meanwhile, she was busy building her own amateur intelligence network. She had installed high-end surveillance cameras aimed directly at my slip, creating a round-the-clock monitoring station right in her second-floor window. The irony of it all was beautiful, because she was actively documenting her own stalking behavior for us. The heavy scent of her cigarette smoke drifting down during her long surveillance sessions became a running joke at the marina. People even started calling her window the crow's nest, complete with binoculars and a radio scanner to monitor our patrol frequencies. We only discovered the radio scanner because a buddy of mine in communications ran a routine check. You and I can probably agree that sometimes a stalker's own obsession becomes their undoing, and that is exactly what happened here. Under federal laws, targeting military families specifically because of their active service status qualifies for hate crime enhancement, adding an extra 10 years to a sentence. But the real twist came when Karen's massive surveillance setup backfired on her completely. Her round-the-clock recording had actually captured dozens of hours of footage, showing me doing absolutely nothing but my normal, perfectly legal daily harbor patrol duties. When she eagerly marched down to the local police station to present this footage as proof of my suspicious military activities, Officer Martinez took one look at it and laughed. He told her flat out that the video simply showed a professional sailor doing his job legally, and if anything, it proved my incredible restraint in the face of her constant harassment. Naturally, Karen's immediate reaction was to escalate the matter to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, claiming I was running unauthorized military operations in a civilian neighborhood. That was how Special Agent Rodriguez got assigned to the case, and suddenly I found myself sitting across a desk from a federal investigator, explaining why my routine harbor patrols were being treated like a rogue military coup. Agent Rodriguez explained to me that Karen sincerely believed authorized military patrols were a direct threat to community safety, handing over 47 hours of surveillance video as proof. He chuckled, noting that the footage only showed me doing my job highly professionally. But his deep dive into her files revealed something far more sinister. Karen had been systematically tracking not just me, but all 12 military families living in our waterfront community. She kept meticulous logs of our work schedules, photos of our kids, and logs of every single visitor. It was an invasive stalking operation that would have made the Stasi secret police proud. Meanwhile, she was recruiting her nephew Trevor for what she called a major strike on my boat. Trevor was desperate for quick cash to cover his rent and habits, so he eagerly agreed to help his aunt with what she pitched as an evidence-gathering mission to expose my illegal activities. The guy had a rap sheet a mile long, filled with breaking and entering, vandalism, and drug possession charges. He was exactly the kind of accomplice who turns a minor neighborhood harassment dispute into a major federal conspiracy case. Karen was completely blind to the fact that she was building a criminal enterprise that would hand federal prosecutors an open and shut case. Meanwhile, the Homeowners Association board finally realized she was a massive legal liability, voting to distance themselves completely and demanding she halt all enforcement pending a legal review. By that point, Karen's isolation was absolute. Her relentless spying had alienated the entire neighborhood. The local courts had laughed her legal threats out of the room, and federal agents were actively investigating her bribery attempts. Even her own family members were starting to question her bizarre obsession with purging the military from our community. But as I had learned throughout my career, isolating a desperate person only makes them more dangerous. By mid-November, she had slipped from mere desperation into a state of complete delusion. She went as far as organizing a fake group called the Citizens Committee for Harbor Safety, scheduling a massive public meeting with city council members and reporters to expose my supposed military occupation. Using her 47 hours of surveillance footage, she put together a detailed slideshow titled Homeland Security Threats in Residential Areas, inviting 3 city council members, 2 local reporters, and the marina management team. Meanwhile, Trevor had graduated from passive scouting to active deployment. His job on this major operation was to bring bolt cutters and a heavy crowbar to break into my boat under the guise of evidence gathering. He was so desperate for his aunt's cash and so drug-addled that he had no grasp of federal conspiracy laws, readily agreeing to the 3 a.m. break-in scheduled for November 23rd. Looking back, I still laugh at her telling him they were going to document the secret military weapons I was hiding. Looking back, you and I can probably agree that hubris is a slow-burning fuse. Karen was entirely convinced that once she captured photographic proof of weapons or explosives on my vessel, the local authorities would have no choice but to evict me. In her mind, she had already won, even going so far as to schedule a 9 a.m. press conference on November 23rd to showcase her supposed findings. The marina management had already warned me of her formal intent to expose me, but I just watched it all unfold through my network of federal contacts. I kept my composure, knowing my security system was fully prepared. The base security was fully briefed on her radio scanning, and the mechanical setup was flawless. I had calibrated the pressure plates to activate at precisely 47 pounds. Setting the limit at 47 pounds kept the local seagulls from causing false alarms, but it was a surefire way to catch any grown adult who dared trespass on my deck. Beneath the wood, I rigged military-grade cartridges with a vibrant green dye that would burst in a cloud visible from 300 yards away. Just offshore, Captain Hayes kept the patrol boat SP 44431 hidden but ready to respond. All the while, federal agents documented Karen's scheme using her own spy equipment. Her obsessive monitoring had created a perfect paper trail for her own downfall. She did not realize that plotting to damage military assets with accomplices significantly escalates federal charges. Walking onto a target site with specialized tools for destruction is the textbook definition of premeditation. When you drag accomplices into a federal crime, the legal system multiplies the punishment for everyone involved. As the sun struggled to rise on November 23rd, I personally inspected every wire and plate with intense focus. The cold morning air was quiet, save for the gentle waves slapping the wood and the distinct purr of Karen's luxury sedan coming down the road. She rolled in at precisely 3:30 in the morning, accompanied by Trevor and a high-end camera. They brought along evidence bags for their upcoming media event, and she had even packed yellow police tape to cordon off my boat after claiming she found my non-existent weapons cache. Slung over Trevor's shoulder was a heavy set of bolt cutters and a steel crowbar, tools meant to break into my private storage lockers. They were laying the bricks of their own prison cells, and our hidden lenses caught every single movement in high definition. I still remember her hushed whisper as they crept onto the wooden planks, telling him they absolutely needed clear photos of explosives because their big media reveal was only 5 hours away. She was completely oblivious to the fact that my commander was watching from the dark water, that federal agents were logging the whole operation through her own cameras, and that she was dragging her nephew straight into a co-defendant slot in a federal indictment. What she failed to realize was that pressurized military marking dye doesn't just leak. It erupts in a blinding neon cloud that leaves a mark visible from an airplane. The heavy morning fog gave her a false sense of security, but it also perfectly hid the tactical response boats waiting in the dark. High-resolution night vision cameras from federal teams were locked onto her position, capturing pristine, courtroom-grade video of every step. Standing by my kitchen window, I sipped my coffee and felt that familiar, cold focus you get before a major operation. Everything was in place, tested, and ready. It was exactly 3:47 in the morning when her boot finally made contact with my deck. She moved with total certainty, believing her months of stalking had led her to the ultimate moment to ruin my naval career. You and I both know how quickly plans can unravel when you don't account for basic physics. The silent pressure plate beneath her feet instantly clocked 127 pounds of force. In a fraction of a second, the hidden canisters fired with absolute reliability, rewriting Karen Ashworth Klein's future in a blinding burst of green. The discharge was a work of art. The pressurized dye sprayed from hidden nozzles like a surgical strike, painting her from her hair down to her shoes in a luminous shade of green that practically hummed under the yellow pier lamps. The mechanical system I spent hours fine-tuning performed flawlessly, delivering exactly what the schematics guaranteed. It ensured total saturation of the intruder in bright, chemical-grade proof. Her high-pitched scream cut through the quiet harbor, a mixture of raw terror and fury that surely shook nearby homes. She stood there completely paralyzed, drenched in neon slime that was rapidly drying on her skin and designer wear, while her accomplice lost his mind. Trevor shrieked in terror, dropping his tools onto the wood just as the secondary defense valves popped, soaking him in the exact same green gel. He yelled at her about not signing up for traps, completely unaware that our cameras recorded everything. Every action of their attempted break-in, from the heavy tools they carried to their messy, neon-soaked capture, was captured in perfect high-definition detail. Within 90 seconds, the shore patrol vessel SP 44431 glided up to the dock with its red and blue lights reflecting off the water. Captain Hayes had kept a close ear on the radio channels, and the instant my rig tripped, 2 high-speed interceptors closed the trap. My commander stepped onto the wooden pier, looking immaculate in his service dress, flanked by armed guards and a federal agent. He calmly informed her she was being detained for targeting military property, conspiracy, and disrupting official operations. My commander delivered the charges with the cool, absolute authority of an officer who had spent weeks coordinating this trap. Karen, clawing thick green goop from her eyelashes, began screaming wildly about military conspiracies and illegal booby traps. The officers remained completely unfazed, reminding her that she had crossed onto government property carrying burglary tools, and that the marking dye was a standard, non-toxic security measure. Trevor attempted a desperate break for it, but his paint-slicked shoes betrayed him, sending him sliding face-first into a neon puddle. Before he could even push himself up, the guards had his hands cuffed behind his back, much to the amusement of the early morning dog walkers gathering nearby. There stood Karen Ashworth Kleiney, the undisputed tyrant of the local homeowners association, shivering in expensive pajamas while covered in brilliant green dye. The guards quietly read her constitutional rights as she shrieked about harassment and demanding her high-priced attorney. That was when Special Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, carrying a massive manila folder packed with 3 inches of investigative files. He looked her in the eye and added charges of bribing informants, submitting fraudulent federal claims, and executing a targeted campaign against naval personnel. The sweet poetic justice was that her own high-end video camera, still humming on the tripod, had documented every single moment of their downfall. Instead of destroying my life, the video she recorded served as the ultimate prosecution exhibit, proving her guilt beyond a shadow of a doubt. To make matters worse for her, that tactical dye takes about 3 weeks to wash out of human skin. You see, I chose that exact moment to step out of my cabin, dressed in my immaculate pressed service dress uniform. I did not smile or throw any cheap insults. I simply stood tall, observing the scene with the quiet discipline expected of my rank. Saluting Captain Hayes, I reported that the defensive measures had functioned perfectly, marking the intruders with non-toxic dye. Standing in the crowd were 3 city council members she had invited to watch my ruin. Rather than witnessing the exposure of a dangerous weapons cache, the city officials watched a masterclass in federal law enforcement capturing serial harassers. The brilliance of the marking dye lay in its specific design parameters. It is completely safe to inhale or touch, yet chemically engineered to resist standard soaps and solvents. Karen was destined to remain a bright green shade for nearly a month, serving as a walking billboard for her own mistakes. The local Channel 7 news truck arrived just as she was being ushered into the back of a federal van. She was still screaming about government plots, looking like a neon green swamp creature that had wandered out of a low-budget movie. The story Lisa Bellamy landed that morning was far bigger and more spectacular than the fake scandal she had originally been promised. It had everything: a documented hate campaign against local service members, multiple federal felonies, and the most embarrassing arrest the marina had ever seen. As Karen shrieked from inside the steel cage of the transport vehicle, the reporter stood before the lens, broadcasting the details of the arrest to the entire city. I simply stood on my porch, enjoying the quiet morning air with the same detached, calm attitude I had maintained for months. There was no need for me to gloat or celebrate. When you let the system do its job, justice is delivered with absolute precision. Looking back now, you and I can see that while that green paint explosion on the dock was spectacular, the real satisfaction came when her entire criminal campaign detonated under the weight of federal evidence. It was justice served, military style. When the prosecutors finally handed down the charges, they read like a dream sheet. There were 14 counts in total, ranging from the destruction of federal property to the bribery of informants, conspiracy, filing false reports, and systematic harassment under hate crime statutes. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea, but the evidence was simply airtight. They had surveillance footage, documented bribes, 47 hours of her own stalking videos, and testimonies from 12 military families. That bright green paint evidence was really just the perfect icing on an already solid prosecution case. 3 months after the incident, the judge sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison and ordered her to pay $73,000 in restitution. That money was meant to cover the property damage, our legal costs, and the expenses of the federal investigation. Her nephew, Trevor, did not get off easy either, receiving 6 months of community service that required him to clean veteran memorial sites every single weekend for 2 years. This financial blow completely devastated her. Her savings vanished into legal fees. She had to sell her lakefront mansion to pay the restitution, and Piton Development Limited Liability Company collapsed entirely. Her case actually ended up setting a major federal precedent for protecting military families against housing discrimination. Soon after, the Department of Justice issued brand new guidelines specifically addressing the harassment of service members in civilian neighborhoods, establishing legal safeguards that reached across the entire country. Down at our marina, the management put new security protocols in place, creating federal liaison positions to make sure families like ours were fully protected. They even posted signs clarifying federal jurisdiction over military vessels and warning of steep penalties for interfering with operations. Meanwhile, my twins, Marcus and Tyler, became local legends as the kids whose dad caught the infamous Green Lady, a story that shore patrol officers still tell today. My wife Sarah was the one who noticed the most significant shift in my post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. Feeling the warmth of a supportive community instead of being under attack provided a deep kind of healing that years of therapy had never managed. Our boat dock finally became peaceful again, filled with the gentle sounds of lapping water rather than her cigarette smoke and surveillance gear. The Harbor Heroes program I launched drew in military families from all over the region. Teaching boat safety to these kids allowed us to build positive connections, and receiving $340,000 in federal grants let us fund mental health resources for families facing harassment. It did not take long for our program to expand statewide once we documented that the systematic discrimination was happening in several other waterfront communities. Now, every year on November 23rd, which marks the exact anniversary of her arrest, the annual Military Appreciation Harbor Festival brings together civilian and military families alike. Local businesses step up to sponsor events that honor our service, celebrating the incredible community cooperation that finally cut her harassment campaign short. Her green-stained skin became an enduring local legend around here. Long after the paint washed away, folks still called her the Grinch of the harbor, even after she packed up and moved to a strict homeowners association community in Arizona that quickly grew tired of her antics. After completing his mandatory community service hours, Trevor actually made the decision to enter a veteran-sponsored addiction recovery program. None of us could ignore the profound irony of military families stepping up to help her nephew overcome the very struggles that had landed him in federal court. Around that same time, I received a formal commendation from Base Command for dealing with her relentless civilian harassment with professional military discipline. Captain Hayes pointed out that my calm approach had fostered great relations between us and the town, while keeping everyone safe through the proper channels. Once she was gone, property values in our Marina neighborhood actually went up, as the presence of stable, active service families drew in wonderful new residents. The incredible investigative reporting done by Lisa Bellamy went on to win several regional journalism awards, eventually even sparking congressional hearings on the systematic discrimination faced by military families living in civilian communities. Because of those hearings, federal legislation now guarantees far stronger protections and hands down much harsher penalties for anyone targeting service personnel. 6 months after her arrest, I was sitting on the dock teaching my boys how to tie proper knots when Tyler looked up and asked, "Dad, why did the mean lady hate us so much?" I looked at him and said, "Son, some people are just afraid of things they do not understand. But when good people stand together, justice wins." That evening was peaceful, watching families enjoy the water. Today, my shore patrol boat sits properly moored and respected, proudly flying the American flag she once tried to hide. The smell of barbecue from the community dock party mixes with diesel fuel and lake water, creating the perfect scent of home. If you and I have learned anything, it is that our service members deserve our full support. If you have faced homeowners association nightmares or harassment due to your military service, share your story in the comments below. Please subscribe for more stories about justice served, military style. Sometimes, the best way to support our families is showing everyone what happens when you mess with them. Our community is finally safe, and our mission is accomplished.